Command Share, brought to you by Star City Games. I'm your host, Sheldon Menery, founding member of the Commander Rules Committee. In each episode, I'm joined by one of my RC compatriots, and we talk about the high-level things, the thought processes, what we're thinking about right now on the Commander RC in our first block, and then after a brief interlude, we move into the chair block, where we lean back, stretch our legs a little bit, and talk about the cards, the decks, the techs that we like to bring to the games that the folks on the RC like to play. This episode's co-host is the one and the only Toby Elliott. Toby, have a seat in the command chair, which I understand is currently 100% otter-free.
Oh, excellent. And you also added lumbar support, which is right. Really nice. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a class establishment. Now, it's been a month since we've been able to record an episode, so anything new you want to tell the folks that's happening in Toby land?
No, same as usual, really. We're still locked up at home and, waiting to get out. My busy filled social calendar awaits or something, but it is what it is. 1 month to the election, and then maybe some sanity will arrive. We'll see.
Your lips to God's ears, sir.
Yeah.
All right, let's dive right in. One of the new mechanics in Zendikar Rising is the Modal Double-Faced card. Now, we've seen DFCs before, but not like this. So why don't you go over the basics of the DFCs mechanically?
So the traditional DFCs, since we've had since the start, they always come in front face up. And that's been pretty clear. Something then happens, turns them over, and they're a sort of different card. And we spent a long time establishing those rules. They're all fine. Everything's smooth. And then, because it's Magic and things constantly change, they're like, okay, we have a new twist on them, and that's these new Modal Double-Faced cards. And unlike the previous ones, essentially both faces are active anytime. So you can choose to, whenever you have this card in your hand...
In your hand. That's the important part, yeah.
Well, no, it's actually not even in your hand. Everywhere, basically. We'll get to some of the really weird intricacies here, because there's some kind of strange corners. But if it's in your hand, you can say, I want to play this as the spell is on the front face, or you can say, I want to play the land that is on the back face. Both
right.
choices are actually valid at any given time. And there's not any way for one of these Modal Double-Faced cards to transform, which is very, very important, because if you've played your land and you don't want things transforming on the battlefield into sorceries or any random stuff like that, the game rules handle them. They don't handle them terribly well, and not in a way that you would want for gameplay. They'd all just go away. So
right.
Moon Mist becomes weird land destruction. It's that sort of level of oddness. So these things can't transform. They don't have that mechanic. They are simply one card with two faces. And I think the clearest implementation of these are the ones that essentially have a plains on one side and a swamp on the other side sort of thing, right. Where it's literally you choose which of these two lands you want to put into play, which from a designer perspective, I love that mechanic. It's a really elegant way of making a dual land that is balanced, but still kind of a dual land. I mean, it's
except for the fact that they don't have land types.
They don't have land types, and you have to make the choice up at the beginning, which makes them way more interesting. Like, a dual land isn't terribly interesting as a card because there's no real choices to make. If you have a dual land, some tiny corners involving price of progress and other stuff aside,
sure,
the dual land is always, you just play the dual land and it's always correct and good, and you now have 2 colors of mana. Here,
right.
You have to make that choice, and that is at least, and that's at least an interesting trade-off for not having the basic land types, is now it's like, this is not strictly better than having a plains. It can have plains or mountain, but it's not like I will always play this, because yes, as you say, there's not a basic land type on there, and that's a big deal. But yes, so these cards are both sides basically at all times. You can't always play on both sides, or you can't always interact with both sides, but they are both sides at all times. Well, but only one side's actually in effect on the battlefield.
Although when it's in other zones, it's always the front face.
Well, like, yes, it is.
If you're searching your library,
yes,
and it's a spell and a land, the front face is the only one that matters.
But here's where it gets quirky, is because if it's in your graveyard and you have, say, Crucible of Worlds in play, you can play it as a land.
Right.
Because what the rules of Magic essentially start with a big black void. You can't do anything. And then the rules sort of layer on permissions and say, okay, during your turn, at these certain times, you have the ability to play a land. And, they give you permission for how you declare a spell and how you do everything else. And Magic is essentially building on permissive things until you get an actual functional game. And because even though it's face up as a sorcery in your graveyard, you still have the ability to play it as a land because you have the ability to follow the rules for playing a land to put this card onto the battlefield. You can't, however,
corner case 101, yeah.
Yeah, you can't, however, target it with, say, Life from the Loam, because you can't target a land spell in your graveyard or land in your graveyard because it's not actually a land when it faces face up. You have this weird ability to actually play it because you can say, as part of the steps of playing it, you turn it over essentially and put it into play, and that actually matches what Magic permits you to do. So there are some really weird and interesting rules quirks. If you think of it largely as you can only target the front face or choose the front face in those situations, you're generally fine. But there are weird places where you can do things that the back face still is there. It's still like part of the card at all times.
Yeah, but part and parcel, the front face is the one that matters unless it's in your hand or unless you're about to put it on the stack or to put it into play.
Yeah, you can Thoughtseize land now.
Yeah, exactly. So what about the color identity of such cards?
Well, the color identity, I don't think it actually is impacted by the back face in any of these situations, but because color identity looks at both sides of the card, we follow the color identity's essential expression is look at the mana symbols on your commander, don't put cards in your deck that have other mana symbols.
Right.
And that applies to all parts of the card. So we just treat the card as if both sides were visible at all times, which means that the planes with the mountain on the back, so I guess there are some that affect this.
Yeah.
The planes with the mountain on the back has a red and a white color identity because we look at both of those mana symbols.
Right. All right, so any last hits on the rulesy things till we move on to talking about actually playing them in the format?
So it's been interesting. We've now had 2 non-core sets in a row where they have really been pushing the boundaries of what the rules can do. We had Mutate, which was a lot of rules, which was intuitively fairly obvious but very rulesy in terms of the corners and in terms of what it actually took to express it in the rules. And now we have Modal Double-Faced cards. And that's very interesting to me from a sort of Melvin perspective, in that I'm always very interested in what they're thinking in terms of rules. And what they've gone for in both these cases, and I don't know if this is a general design shift or something that they're just happen to have done back-to-back, is these are very intuitive until you actually know the rules, and then you're like, whoa, okay, this is kind of a mess. But, I mean, it's a mess in the sense of there's lots of rules to make them, and there's odd corners. It's not a mess in they didn't do a bad job with this. But if they've adopted a philosophy of anything goes as long as it's clear to players and the Magic Rules Manager will cry, then that's actually an interesting place to be, and I'll be curious to see where they take that from here.
Yeah, we love you, Matt Tayback.
Yeah, poor Matt.
Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the important things to think about from a design perspective is flexibility. The DFCs are definitely, the modal DFCs are all about flexibility. You need a land early, you need a spell late. You need land early, you need a creature late. Or you need this land right now, or this color of mana right now, and you have the flexibility to do it. And I think that building more flexibility into cards is way better from a design perspective than just making cards do everything.
Yeah, and you can get away with a lot when you're intuitive. The classic example of this is the lair system. The Magic Lair system, nobody go read the Magic Lair system. It's well, judges, go read the Magic Lair system.
Yeah, right.
Humans should not read the Magic Lair system. It's crazy, it's complicated, it's long, but in 99% of cases, possibly higher, it produces extremely intuitive results. And they've written complicated rules to produce intuitive results because that's way better than the inverse, where you have simple rules and maybe everybody learns them, but they do weird stuff.
Right.
So I don't worry about this because, what I worry about is what players think and how they interpret things, and judges are here to help you with that 1%.
Right. All right, so we've covered the rulesy things. Let's talk about their playability in Commander. Now, it seems like there's some divided opinion. In general, what's your take?
I think these cards are very, very strong and are going to have a very lasting impact on Commander.
Wow. So we definitely have something to talk about then.
Yep.
Because I'm in the more lukewarm on them camp. There are a few that I think provide that sort of flexibility that we talked about, but at what cost? Mm-hmm. Like there should be. I'm not saying that you should have exactly a spell on one side and then something to make it the card even better on the other side. So there needs to be a trade-off for the flexibility, but because the card pool is so large, and I don't think any of the spells provide anything like that's so cool that I just like, oh man, I need to play that fact, or I need to play that ability, that I keep shrugging when I'm looking at the cards. Especially with the lands, with the dual lands, I'd be more likely to play one of the 2-color enters the battlefield tapped lands than one of the DFCs.
So I actually kind of agree there. I think that the dual lands, they'll see some play, but they're not actually the ones that are going to see the most play. I think the spell lands are going to be really, really important. Go ahead. So there's a couple of reasons that I think this. One is when I actually start thinking about Commander power first, the actual first place I look at, and we'll talk about this in our second section, is limited. Mm-hmm. Because Magic is very much a tempo game. It's all about pace of play. And the pace of Commander is much more akin to limited than it is to a traditional tournament format. Like, I actually believe that the general trade-off for the flexibility here is the spell is usually overcosted, and the land comes into play tapped. Those are your trade-offs. Now, land coming into play tapped is a big deal. It's a really big deal in tournament formats, so I don't think you'll see a ton of the sort of more common ones in Standard or Modern or anything like that, because you can't afford to take a turn off for a tapped land in those formats. But in Limited, these cards are proving to be very, very strong, because the pace of play of Limited is lower. You have more turns. Having a land not have an impact on the first turn is much lower. When you're expecting the game to go 10, 15 turns, the cost of it comes into play tapped land is much, much lower than it would be in a game where you're expecting to go 5 to 7 turns. Right. So as in Limited, where these are pretty very strong, what it really comes down to is, in many ways, is how much these replace lands versus how much these replace spells. So if you're taking a spell out of Commander to get the flexibility of maybe having a tapped land periodically, not that compelling. The spell is expensive. Most of them aren't all that impactful. Some of the mythics are good enough to stand on their own. Mm-hmm. But if you're thinking about these, the first few replace land, because, obviously you can't have every land in your deck come into play tapped, and the really heavy, like the 5-color decks aren't going to want to deal with this. Like, I'm not going to put these in Niv Mizzet, for example. Right. But if it's a 2-color deck where you don't have a ton of comes into play tapped lands already, these suddenly become, I can replace a land with these. And when the equation is, this is a land that comes into play tapped that when I don't need land is not a dead card late. Right. That's a very strong equation. Yeah, I'm going to agree on that point. In theory, that that flexibility of play is really important to the cards. Is there enough bang for the buck on the back end of playing the spell or creature as opposed to the land? My take is there's the green one, which the backside is a forest basically, and the front side is regrowth for 3 mana. So it's a slightly expensive regrowth. On turn 10, if I have 8, 9 land in play, having drawn a regrowth, the marginal value of regrowth over another land at that point is huge. It's pretty extreme. Then the 1 extra mana doesn't really hurt that much. And by the time you want to be playing these as not land, the 1 extra mana does not hurt. So I feel like that, I will, in many, many green decks, simply replace a forest with with that card,
Mm-hmm.
and every once in a while it'll be a downside if it comes into play tapped early on. Not a giant downside in the sort of tempo that we're looking at in Commander.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while it will be a regrowth late in the game and be very impactful. And that's sort of why I think that these things, even though individually they're not super powerful cards, are subtly powerful enough that you're going to actually see a heck of a lot of these.
Now, are you going to build ways in to bounce the lands in case you played them early to get the spell, or are you just going to sort of use the time that you draw it to determine what you're going to do?
Mostly the latter. I mean, there may be a deck or two where I come up with some cool shenanigan to take advantage of the spell, but as we've observed, these spells are not impactful enough that you should be bending over backwards to make this happen.
Right.
Like, most of the time, I am perfect, because it's replaced a land, I'm perfectly happy to play it as a land and treat it as a land for the rest of the game. It was destined to be a land all along.
Right.
If I'm, I don't need it to then become a spell later on to get full value out of it. I've already got the value. I mean, yes, there is a kind of sweet upside that if you do, like trade routes is a really cool card with these things.
Yeah.
But, that sort of thing can happen, and there are some neat interactions there. But I don't think that's actually an essential part of making these cards really strong in Commander. Not strong in like obvious, impactful ways, but strong in very subtle. This is actually a pretty solid improvement to my deck, and the cost is mitigated by the nature of the format.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so why don't we go over at least the rares in the colors that are both lands and spells. I mean, dual lands are just dual lands. We don't really need to talk about them too much. So let's pull up the list here. And the first one we start with is Emeria's Call. So it's 4 and 3 white sorcery. Create 2/4/4 angels. Seems okay for 7 mana. That's a little heavy. But the second sentence is the important one. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn.
Wow.
Playable or not?
Yeah, very. I mean, this is exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about here. Is this could replace a land in your deck? And again, don't everybody go and make your entire deck tap lands. That's a bad idea. But
right.
As long as you aren't already like overloaded with tap lands, this is replacing a plains, and suddenly you have a massive game-swinging play on turn 10 or whatever, or you played it as a plains somewhere along the way. I actually think this card would be fine without that second rider. That second rider is just gravy. It's a very strong gravy, but
right.
Like making 2 angels, yeah, it's not the best thing in the world, but it's better than nothing. It's sort of the it's the Lutri theory. Like we've often said that Lutri has to be banned because the cost is 0.
Right.
And so it's sort of the same thing here. It doesn't matter how meh the card is, it's better than a land on turn 10.
Right. But
I
think by some extension that you're probably going to have other things you want to play. The only time that you're like really excited to peel this when you don't, when you're hellbent, is that you literally have nothing else to play.
Yeah, absolutely. But yes, and then you throw on the indestructible rider, which is crazy powerful. And
right, and of course that's again until your next turn. It's not just on this turn. It's a trip around the table, and that's super important.
Yeah, and, I mean, spoiler, that card will go straight into Heliod.
Right,
it's everything Heliod wants to do.
All right, the other rare in white is Ondu Inversion. 6 white, destroy all non-land permanents.
Also goes straight into Heliod.
Right. So it's basically planar cleansing for 2 more mana, except one fewer white. But for 2 more mana, that has the land on the backside. Again, you're playing this?
Yes, absolutely. This will go into Heliod. It blows things up early on. I mean, Heliod right now runs like 18, 19 planes.
Right.
The deck has it's monocolored, so there's no that comes into play tap duels or anything like that.
Right.
Like Memorial to Glory is in there. There's probably 1 or 2 tap lands. Having 1 or 2 more tap lands in that deck is not going to be much of a downside. Having another Wrath and another source of creature tokens and indestructibility those are big upsides.
Yeah, it's fair. I think I would play both of the white spells.
Mm-hmm.
Just, again, slot them as a land, and then if you happen to get to play the spell, it's going to make your deck, so you play two of these spells, it's going to make your deck list look weird because now you're running 35 lands as far as the front face is concerned, whereas you actually have access to 37.
Right.
So in blue, the first one is Glasspool Mimic. You can have Glasspool Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a shapeshifter rogue in addition to its other types. Now, this is a clone for your own stuff, but it only costs a blue and 2. Playable?
Yeah, I mean, it's a clone that costs blue and 2. A clone that costs blue and 2 is a pretty playable card anyway.
Right.
I mean, even setting aside, does it have a land on the back? This is one of the more, I guess, aggressively costed cards here.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, it's very playable. This one actually, I could see being more of a, replaces a spell in your deck and has a random upside of if you need a land, you need a land.
Yeah, I'm at 3 mana. It's hard for me to imagine that if I draw this in my opening hand, that I want to play it as a land. Because it's right there. I'm going to want to clone something right away. Right?
If your hand is 2 land and this card, it's a
right.
snap keep.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, but the fact that you can only clone your own stuff, that's fine because you're putting good stuff in your deck in the first place.
Ideally.
Yeah.
The one downside of cloning your own stuff here is that, wraths and stuff are prevalent in the format. Mm-hmm. So you are setting yourself up to be a little bit blown out. But, 3 mana clone.
Right. The 3 mana clone. I think that's all we need to say. Other one is Seagate Restoration. 4 and 3 blue. So the mythics are expensive, it seems. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, +1, and you have no maximum hand size the rest of the game. What do you think?
It's probably win more. I will put it in some decks somewhere because it's exactly the kind of win more I like.
Right.
This strikes me as the spell that you want to put in the Trade Routes deck, where
right.
you aggressively play this card early on as a land, and then try to pick it up later on for the big impact.
Trade Routes being blue, after all.
Yes, exactly. So, I think this one will see less play from my perspective, but I mean, it's a giant, huge, monster impacting spell late in the game, and that's worth something. Whether it turns out to be just too much work for you were winning anyway, or if it's actually like this spell doesn't pull you back. Like the advantage of, say, the White Wrath, or even the white, either of the white ones, is if you were behind, you may no longer have been behind. This spell, if you were behind, you're probably dead.
Right, so, because you spent 7 mana in order to just draw the cards. Now you need more to do stuff.
It's a sorcery, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you spent 7 mana on your turn. Didn't keep up. You aren't keeping up counter spells or anything useful or any other instance. This one's just. It's just the power of the front side is questionable. It is definitely impactful, and there will be some decks where it belongs. But I don't see this being quite as good as the white ones.
Well, if you're playing Psychosis Crawler, it becomes a kill spell, right?
Sure. Yes. There are all sorts of shenanigans you can do with Psychosis Crawler.
Right. Yeah, what's the number of cards for 7 mana, a 7 mana sorcery? What's the number of cards that you want to draw where you feel like you're at least getting value? 7. Wow.
I mean, as a sorcery, as an instant, I would be willing to go a lot lower, but 7 for a sorcery.
Yeah. Okay, in black, we have Agadeem's Awakening. X, black, black, black. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that have different converted mana cost X or less. This has got to be saucy, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is what you want. Like I said, this is where early on it's a land. Late game, this is a massively impacting card, both if you're behind or ahead. This one will go straight to Tasker.
Yeah, you have especially since you probably have some sort of curve that you've cast on early. You've cast your 3, 4, 5, 6, and when board wipe happens, I mean, it's 9 mana to get all that back, but still, putting 4 cards back onto the battlefield with no chance of the other players getting stuff like with a Living Death or a Patriarch's Bidding.
Yeah, no, this card will turn games around. Like I would consider this card. It's probably not quite good enough for just its front face, but with the added ability to just play it as a land when you need a land, I think this is a highly impactful card.
All right, the second one is Hagra Mauling. Spell costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic lands. I think that's a nod to the Commander format a little bit. It costs 4, black 2. So as an instant, destroy target creature. Again, aren't you going to choose better options here?
No, I think this is one of these primo examples of a card where the incremental value is really good. Drawing a removal spell late, even a slightly overcosted removal spell, is very good. I mean, obviously it's not going to have the impact of like the previous card, but it's strong utility on a card where, you know, if you think about it as I'm usually going to play the land and every once in a while it's a removal spell, I think that's a really good that's really good value. I don't know that it's not going to go into. I mean, it's not going to go into every deck or anything.
Right.
But if I'm playing a black deck and feel like I have space for a couple of tapped lands to go into it, this is pure upside, and it's. I mean, removal is always valuable.
Removal is always valuable to me. I mean, it's just a 1-for-1, and you and I know that in Commander, 1-for-1s aren't often all that great.
Yes and no. I find that I'm actually liking 1-for-1s a little more.
Really?
Maybe Buy a Box or Boxing League has affected this a bit.
Sure.
But you're correct that a 1-for-1 is generally not good for Commander, but it beats a 0-for-1, which is what happens if you just drew a swamp.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. I think it's a reasonable angle to look at it from. Like you, I don't think I'm jamming this into too many decks, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, it will have its place.
Yeah. Red gives us Shatter Skull Smashing, red X, deals X damage divided, and it's a sorcery, divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, Shatter Skull Smashing deals twice X instead. Damage to creatures.
Yeah, this is kill 2 creatures for a lot of mana as a sorcery.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not particularly excited about this one.
I think we've hit our first whiff here.
Yeah, I mean, it will go in a deck occasionally where I'm like, I don't have anything that I'm like, you know, if I end up with a deck like this would have gone to my Atali deck where I had, you know, 25 mountains, because there I could afford 1 tapped land, sure, whatever. But sure. Yeah, I'm not gonna be like, how do I fit this into a deck or anything? It's just the payoff isn't there.
The other red is Valakut Awakening. It's an instant for a red and 2. Put any number of cards from your hand onto the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1.
I can definitely see this getting use. It's essentially, and this is one where late game, you know, you're holding 3 land in hand because you've got land flooded early, or you've got spells you're like, these are not very valuable, I'm not getting a lot of this. It replaces itself, which is actually very unusual for these type of red cards. Usually these type of red cards, you end up down a card essentially, or it's one of the ones where you draw 7. But usually with this sort of rummaging, you end up down a card. Here you're not ending up down a card, and that actually makes it pretty compelling. This is one where the front side is possibly worth it, just almost worth it for its own value, and then the back side is a mountain. Right.
Well, it's wheeling for you if you need it, if you're playing Nekusar or something like that.
And
or,
that.
Again, our friend Psychosis Crawler if you're playing your Mind Moil deck or something.
Which I have been known to do.
Right. Some utility, again, I agree with the point. This is way better than drawing a land late. Because you have opportunity to do something with it. Onto the green, the creature is Kazandu Mammoth. It has landfall. It's a 3/3. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Mammoth gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Sort of vanilla, not particularly exciting.
Yes and no. I believe if I remember rightly, what's it cost?
It costs 3.
That's pretty cheap. I mean, that's a early game. That's a 5/5 on most turns for 3 mana. Admittedly, a vanilla 5/5, it's not going to set the world afire, but it's actually reasonably costed. That's a solid. That's an aggressively costed card. That one I think actually might see some tournament play. I mean, we're in a weird standard right now where everything is ridiculously powerful. In a traditional standard, I think this card would have been. You go back a few years, this card would have actually, I think, been quite impactful.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you play Evolving Wilds and this thing's suddenly a 7/7.
Yeah, exactly. So it has potential, I think, across a lot of formats. 5/5 vanilla and Commander, not that compelling. Might not make the cut all the time, partly because of what the other green one does. We'll get to that now.
Right.
But, I mean, I could certainly see this making decks.
So the other green one that Toby's talking about is Turn Timber Symbiosis. It, like many of the other ones, costs 7, 4 and 3 green. It's a sorcery. Looks top 7 cards of your library. You can put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. If that card has converted mana cost of 3 or less, it enters with 3 additional +1 counters on it, and then put the rest on the bottom.
Yeah, that's already at least one deck.
So it doesn't. It's never a whiff, right? If you're playing any of the ones that look at the top X cards and put one onto the battlefield, when the only card in there is Elvish Visionary, you spent a lot of mana for nothing. Well, a card, but still. With this ability that puts the counters on it, now suddenly you've got something that's a little more compelling.
Yeah, I actually think that I really like that part of the design. It's acknowledging that the feel bads on this card when you hit an Elvish Visionary are high. If you hit a much larger Elvish Visionary, it's still not amazing, but it's still it's a lot better. And this card to me is very much what I was talking about earlier. Is this is a land a lot of the time. But late game, this is a nice. Let's go and get something out of my library. The 7 cards, even in Commander, is pretty deep. Unless odds are, unless you've built a really weird deck, you're gonna hit something, and with the extra rider, you're gonna hit something which has board presence.
Right, and if you're playing a +1 counters deck in the first place, now you have you get a Spike Feeder with this.
Yeah,
and you get 3 additional +1 counters on it. Or you just got your Phantom Neshoba anyway, so that's fine. You don't underestimate the value of playing the library manipulation and then playing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card, if it was just this card without the land on the back, I don't think I'd consider it very often. But when you think of it as a land with this upside, this is serious upside.
Right. All right. So, out of the 10 cards we've talked about, which is the one that you're really itching to play?
Well, as I said, I've already put the green one in a deck. I mean, there's a bunch of them I'm itching to play. I think that the black one, the black mythic, is going to be a lot of fun. It's very, very swingy. I mean, the white, the black, and the green mythics, I think I will want to be picking up multiple copies of. Yeah,
I really think that the black one especially is my kind of card. Like bringing stuff out of the graveyard, that does it for me.
Yeah, that is definitely your kind of card.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've explored the rulesy things well enough. Why don't we stretch our legs a little bit? The folks that come on this show have been playing the format for a long, long time. We run cards that some newer players might have never come across. We discuss some of those cards each week in our feature segment, Hidden Gems. Now, Your hidden gems are sometimes the most hidden. Why don't you give us some goodness?
It was a little less. In fact, I'm breaking my rule slightly in that I'm going to give you a not old bordered card. But I've been building. I'm actually building a couple new commander decks right now, and I stumbled across this one while I was building this because I've used it before. I love it, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. And it comes from Avacyn Restored, which is a set that gets a lot of maligning for a lot of reasons. So it's been kind of forgotten. But my card is Dark Imposter. And Dark Imposter is a 2/2 for 3, which is not terribly exciting. But it has two very, very relevant abilities on it. The first one is you get a 6 and exile a creature and put a +1/+1 counter on it.
Yep.
Exiling is incredibly powerful in Commander. You have to deal with recursive threats all the time. It's expensive, but it's Commander. You'll probably have them on at some point. And then the second one is and this doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it's always hilarious. Dark Imposter has all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with it.
Right.
Which means you occasionally get to build the weirdest Voltron ever.
Right.
It's sort of, I don't want to say trinket text, it's sort of a nice bonus. Like you're playing this card because it is repeatable exile removal.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's incredibly powerful in Commander. But every once in a while it does do something, a bonus hilarity, and I love it for that. But yeah, it's just a card that it's a 2/2, but it's a must remove 2/2. Like, they can't let this sit on the battlefield, or you're going to start wrecking. The other thing I really like about this card is it's super rattlesnakey.
Yes.
Like if you have 6 mana up, and 2 people have large creatures they want to, or just have creatures they want to hang on to, they're tempted not to actually kill it, in the hopes you'll go after the other one.
Right.
So it's not a huge rattlesnake. I mean, somebody's going to kill this card because it will take over the game, but it's a nice little bonus of maybe if you don't kill it, Sheldon's creature over there, that's a giant pain. I can get rid of that for you.
Right. So I think people underestimate this card when they see it on the battlefield. Like, you play it and they're like, oh, that costs 6 mana to activate, no big deal, right? You can't do that too much. But then they see it in action, they're like, man, Toby is wrecking me with that card. So I've played it before. I play it in a budget deck. I have a deck where both the cards are inexpensive and the cards are inexpensive to play. So I don't think there's anything over CMC 5 in the deck. And this fits and gives you a really relevant and good ability. Good pick. Now I'm going to go to a old bordered card, and I'm going to go all the way back into the Mirrodin block with Shriveling Rot. It's an instant, costs 2 and 2 black, and it's a modal. Choose one. Till end of turn, whenever a creature is dealt damage, destroy it. Or, until end of turn, whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller loses life equal to its toughness. And the big thing it has here is Entwine. 2 generic and a black. So for 7 mana, you can have both effects. Have you seen this card in play?
I have not. Although I'm immediately like, Pestilence.
Right. Pestilence will wipe somebody's board. Or wipe everybody's board.
Wipe everybody's board.
But this is one where if you're playing a low creature count deck, and you know that your environment is a little bit wrath happy anyway, you can really catch some people with their pants down. Because it's gonna murder people. Loses life equal to its toughness.
I'm actually wondering about some sort of go wide black red goblins deck, where they just blocked your horde of random 1/1s, and suddenly you're like, and now I'm wrathing and you're losing a ton of life.
Right, right. Yeah, I'll lose my 8. You lose your 80.
Well, you don't lose the 8. They blocked, so they lost. All those creatures are dead.
Oh, they're dead already. Right. Yeah, I think it's a crazy card. It's occasionally been a blank because my board has been too good. But if you're playing in a deck that gains you some life anyway, you get out there, you're in front, and then I've definitely killed a number of people with Shriveling Rot. And every time it does, somebody's like, oh, what the hell is that card?
It's a shame it doesn't fit into you did it to yourself.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we've dipped into the mines, dug up a few hidden gems. Here's hoping we've inspired you to do a little spelunking on your own. So, into the chair block. We're going to talk about, as Toby foreshadowed, EDH Boxing League and some of our lessons learned. We're winding down the last few weeks of the league, so let's give it a quick postmortem. What's been your favorite part so far?
My favorite part is it has played very differently from our usual Commander games. It still has Commander feel, but but the way it has played out, I mean, we're still doing all the same sort of posturing we do. There's lots of rattlesnaking. There's lots of like deals and intimidation, and generally, who's the archenemy right now. All that's still there, right. But it's been wrapped up in a very different package from our normal Commander. To give you some very obvious examples, removal is at a huge premium.
Those one-for-ones are important now.
One-for-ones are, I was playing bad one-for-one removals because it was just so important. I mean, the Ikoria box I opened had Plummet in it, and I windmill slammed Plummet into my deck.
Yeah, me too.
That was before I even knew that Scott was going to run a Flyers deck. That was just
right.
Like, there will be targets for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
The basic non-existence of Wraths was really relevant. And that had actually implications for very heavy implications for gameplay. So to my mind, even though we were still playing something that felt very commandery, the actual gameplay was quite different from our usual mode.
Very sealed deck.
It was very sealed deck. I mean, and as a very hardcore limited player, I loved this. This was fine.
So what's been your least favorite part so far?
So, and this has been very interesting as a format construction experiment. My least favorite part has been that I don't think actually I may be a week behind in opening packs. I don't even remember, but I don't care because the marginal value of the packs we opened dropped off very, very quickly. And I may be more guilty is not the right word, but I may have been more of a victim of this than most people. I'm fairly sure I opened the weakest box to begin with. So I had to lean extremely heavily into narrow themes.
Right.
Like the first version of this deck was basically with all the mutate cards, on all the cycling cards, and all the removal, and we were done. And then some filler.
Right.
And so for me, week 2, week 3, I opened packs and I added 8 cards and 6 cards. And then by week 4, I'm adding like 2 cards and one of them's a land. And week 5, it was Zendikar Rising, and the only reason I added any cards at all was that I added some spell lands. So I don't know if we were opening too many packs in those weeks or what, but my deck in particular, it just the interest level in opening further packs dropped off dramatically.
Yeah, I think that in the future I would slow down the rate at which we open packs. Like every other week seems a little better.
Or open 3 a week or something. Yeah.
Right. Or open 3 a week, or I mean that gets pretty awkward pretty fast because you're going to run out of affordable sets to tap into at a certain point.
Yeah.
Right. You have to have a length of your league in mind to really plan it out. Because I think I'm a week behind opening packs too, and don't really much care because I transformed my deck into a different commander. Well,
and that's the thing is that what we actually saw, how we actually ended up reacting to this phenomena was most of us built a second deck. Like I got my A deck in the Brokos deck, and then I went and I just built a Rada Heart of Keld deck partly because the Brokos deck essentially got to a point where I was like, this deck is finished. Like, there's no real value or interest to this deck. I mean, it's fun to play, and I'll keep playing it.
Right.
But let's build a second deck, and there's like, I think I have to swap 6 cards between the 2 decks or something. So even though they share a color, there's not gigantic overlap.
Right.
But and again, part of it was that I had to really excessively adhere to theme. So what I did on week 2 was I opened Amonkhet because I had the mutate, and we'll talk about Ikoria and the impact of Ikoria in a bit. But the mutate part of the deck was just never going to get better. There aren't other mutate cards I could open.
Sure.
But the other half of the deck was cycling, and so I said, okay, let's open a cycling set, and that's Amonkhet is the most recent cycling set that is in Ikoria. And that gave me another set of cycling cards. And then the week after that, I opened, obviously, Hour of Devastation, which was the other cycling set. And at that point, my deck is literally 38 cyclers, 11 mutate cards, and removal. And
but you have a particular cycling card that makes this run.
Well, one of the annoying things is that I never opened any of the major payoffs. I didn't open the red cycling card in Ikoria. I didn't open like Sharknado or anything like that. I didn't open any of the sort of. I didn't. There's a couple of common ones. I opened the Astral Slide Your Own Creature cycler.
Right.
And then in Hour of Devastation, I opened Abandoned Sarcophagus.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, never made this card work before, even in limited. I'm going for it here. And this card has been amazing for me.
Yes.
For those who don't know, it says essentially, anytime a cycling card would go to your graveyard other than being cycled, exile it. And you can play all your cards with cycling out of your graveyard.
Yeah.
Like, it's just an artifact sits there and lets you play it. And, so my game plan was entirely stall with Mutate, win with Mutate eventually, probably. But at some point in the game, play this, I now have 16 more cards in my hand.
Yeah.
And that, I made it work. It's been great. But the problem is that, so after week 3, I've now exhausted all the cycling sets, all the mutate sets. All I'm really looking for at that point is, can I find better removal? And from an excitement of part of the joy of this is the excitement of opening packs. And one of the reasons I particularly want to do this is, I collect sets, but I collect sets by drafting a lot. And obviously, I can't do that right now. I can't go out and get 8 friends and draft. So I used to do that 3 times a week. Now it's never. So I literally had not touched physical Ikoria product until we did this boxing league. So when we're like, well, let's just open a box, I'm like, I have to open a box anyway. This is a great way to do this. And then, I have lot packs lying around to the other thing. So when people say this is an expensive format, and that's an absolutely legitimate criticism about this, you should not do this because you want to throw around, set a bunch of money on fire and for a few weeks. You should do this because you were planning to open that box anyway. For whatever reason, a lot of people get a box of a set or, crack a box with their friends and draft. This is another way for you to have fun with your product that you were going to open anyway. I mean, I talk about how I never open packs in anger. Because I watched somebody, get their draft prize, get their prize for winning a round at F&M, and they crack the pack open, and I'm like, no, don't do that. That was a draftable pack. And to be fair, I now have thousands of packs because I store them up and don't actually end up drafting them all. But the point is not you should go and spend the couple $100 it costs to and we've gotten many hours of entertainment out of this, so I'm not regretting it. But the point is more you should go and do this thing as one of the possible alternate ways of opening your box. I'm a huge fan of, for example, Winston Drafting, which is a 1 versus 1 format. Not because it's an inherently balanced or anything else, but it's actually a pretty compelling limited format that you can play with 2 people, and it's a way more fun way to open a box of cards than crack pack, look at rare, put pack aside, crack pack, look at rare, put pack aside. There's nothing compelling about that. So Boxing League to me was very much about, I've got this box of Ikoria, let's go.
Yeah, I think the thing that I might suggest to friends... Now, remember, the people in our league are all content creators. So we have a little more access to cards and boxes and packs than most folks do. I think if you're going to do this with your friends, that maybe you plan out the ones you're going to start to open with, everybody gets their box, but then you jointly buy boxes of the other stuff that you're going to have picks from, so that, in week 2, everybody gets their 3 Dominaria packs or whatever, and it comes way cheaper than you just going and buying the 3 packs that you want to go.
So I mean, there were limits even for me as somebody who does have access to a lot of Magic cards. When we say I open Amonkhet and then Hour of Devastation, the logical next set to open after that actually is Onslaught, which is the next set back with Cycling. And I was like, okay, well, let's go take a look. Onslaught packs are $17 each. I'm like, there is this is fun and all, but there are limits. I'm not cracking $105 whatever, $100 and whatever dollars worth of packs. Yeah, just for my entertainment in this.
To play 3 cards.
Yeah, don't go out and blow your budget on this. This is a fun pastime to do if you have a box. If you ordered your Commander Legends box and you're planning to just crack it for Commander pieces, go do Boxing League with this first.
I will say that I went at Shivam for his first week's packs open, or his first packs, not his box, opened M12. And I started looking at the list of the playable M12 cards, and I immediately went out to find how much they are, and they were like $6 a piece. So I'm like, absolutely, I'll spend $36 on this. But had they been 16, I wouldn't have spent $96.
Yeah. So what did you learn?
Well, I learned that I think that Ikoria might be busted as the first set to open for your box, for sure. Yeah. That's the one I opened. Now, it's narrow, but it's powerful. And one of the things it has a lot of mana fixing in it. And getting mana fixing if you're opening 6 packs of something is way more difficult than when you're opening 36. And getting a box, starting with a box of cards that has inherent mana fixing in it is really, really strong. I don't think I've ever had, in all the games we've played, I don't think I've ever had a bad mana game.
Yeah, and the games are slower, so they're more forgiving on your mana. Ikoria is definitely, I don't want to say problematic, but I would steer people away from Ikoria as your opening box.
Yeah, I agree.
For similar reasons, but also because Mutate is a very strong ability in an environment with low removal.
Yes.
The first couple weeks, the only way I could win was, my 11 cards, my 11 Mutate cards, I would get up to, having 15 mana in play and then mutate 5 times, including an insatiable hemophage, and drain everybody out. That was you hit. Mutate doesn't look like a terribly powerful mechanic, but it actually turns out to be very, very strong when people have to be very cautious with their removal.
Yeah.
So that became less of an issue as time went on. Ikoria smooths itself out because, as I mentioned earlier, you can't improve your Ikoria box essentially, because Mutate there is no more Mutate. You've got what you've got. So you're gonna fall off while other people catch up and while other people open more removal. And also, I was pretty happy opening Dungrove Elder in my M12 box to go with my Mutate. Yeah, no, there are many fine cards to mutate onto, but you won't get more. The key to Mutate is just those repeatable triggers endlessly. You get Archipelagor on there, and then you start making beasts and draining things, and everybody has to sacrifice a creature. Yada yada. It just starts to really, really add up, and everybody sort of collapses under the weight of your repeatable machine gun.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it turns out to be a very, very powerful mechanic. So just if one person starts with Ikoria, they're likely to do very well in the first few weeks.
Yeah, I agree with that, and they sort of become the threat. Now, poor Scott just a couple of weeks ago had a game where, that was just last week, where it was Brokos, Iluna, and Scott.
I am feeling no sympathy for Scott after that last turn pull on Thursday.
Yes. Well, his deck, he opened Dominaria, and he built 3 distinct decks from his first card pool.
Dominaria is a really good choice because it's both solid and fairly balanced. But no, that game on Thursday, I'm literally gaming out what possible ways he could come back and win this game given my hand. I couldn't come up with one. And then he played Wanderer.
Right.
And it's like, wait, that just invalidated my entire hand.
Right.
And just for the passive. And the minus was also extremely impactful.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like the perfect card. I think, actually, Gavin ultimately broke the format without breaking the format, which is kind of interesting, in that he identified the correct box to open first.
Yes.
He opened Fate Reforged. And for those of you who are heavy limited players, remember, the first weeks of Boxing League play a lot like sort of large-scale limited games.
Mm-hmm.
Fate Reforged is the set where you cracked your Fate Reforged pack and prayed you didn't get one of the like 2 not busted rares,
Right.
and then you just took the rare whatever and moved on. Because that set was basically probably the highest proportion of ridiculously impactful rares in existence.
It was just like bomb after bomb after bomb.
Bomb after bomb after bomb.
Yeah.
And so he correctly identified that would probably be pretty good in this environment. The problem is that because he kept playing bomb after bomb after bomb, we'd have to kill him.
Right.
So it wasn't very subtle.
Yeah.
And so that was, that he would, play Archfiend of Depravity or something
Right.
else ridiculous, and we'd be like, okay, everybody get him, pile on. So he unlike me, who was sitting there going, I got nothing, and, playing some fairly mediocre stuff, and then, oops, my mutate stack just won the game.
Right. Well, at least you had time to draw on your infinite tokens.
No, actually, so infinite tokens also were interesting because in normal Commander, I'm constantly having to draw infinite tokens. In Boxing League, I only ever use the discs. Because there's occasional Oblivion Ring style effect, but
Sure.
there's way more incremental value from Ikoria for things like add trample counters, add +1/+1 counters,
Right.
especially in my deck where I was drawing, but I'm also playing like lower scale Coatl, where,
Mm-hmm.
or the Ominous Seas. So all these things where I was having to count numbers up. So yeah, so I didn't actually draw that many tokens, but my goodness, I've used the discs.
Yeah. There have been a number of pretty epic in-game moments. What has been your favorite?
Scott drawing the Wanderer that last game was like definitely one of my favorites, because that was really one where it was like watching plans crumble to ash in front of me. And of course, none of the rest of you had any idea that I was like completely hosed. My hand was literally at that time. For those who don't know, the Wanderer's passive is you and your creatures are basically immune to non-combat damage.
Right.
And my hand at the time was 3 red burn spells. we basically got to a point where Scott had no cards in hand. We both had no board. Oh no, that's not true. I had a 6/6.
Yeah.
Scott had no cards in hand. I had 3 burn spells in hand. And so he plays the Wanderer. He removes my 6/6 with the minus ability, and all 3 of my cards in hand are dead. So yeah, that was definitely an epic moment.
I was happy with the time that BDM was attacking, and he was going to draw like 30 cards and make everybody discard 15 or something like that.
Good lord.
And I was holding Thwart the Enemy.
Yes, you played that. You played that a bunch early on. Did you cut it eventually? Or
No,
did you make it
no,
still there.
Yeah, it actually in the game Thursday night that you stepped out of, I was at 3, and it looked like anybody could kill me like on demand. So they Scott should have killed me on the next turn, and he didn't. And when Hobbs swung in for a big pile, I thwarted the enemy, wrecked his board, and Gavin didn't quite have... And I think I gained some life, too, because I blocked with Nethroy and something else with lifelink. So I got myself out of the danger zone, and then on the ensuing turn, had enough to swing back and kill both Hobbs and Scott, who were at 6. And then it was a 1v1 for me and Gavin, and we played a couple of really sort of epic grindy turns, and I got him eventually with Xaxes. And he had the manifest, when you turn a card face up, you gain a life.
Oh.
And I hit him for Xaxes, and he didn't have a way of gaining the life.
Oh.
Yeah, because he was going to wreck me on the crackback. But it was like, well, Got to go for it now. I mean, the BDM thing was great because it was just a huge swing from a single card. There was a game where I had Illuna with Colossification on it for 3 turns, and no one died.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
Well, somebody died, and it was me.
Yeah, I mean, Thwart the Enemy is one of those really cool techie cards that you would never see in normal Commander, but when you're forced to work with just a box worth, I mean, that's sort of the beauty of it.
I would play the hell out of Thwart the Enemy in regular Commander.
Do you think it's going to see play?
Yeah, yes, because I'm playing it.
All right, cool.
Well, I mean, it's a one-sided fog.
Yeah, I will keep that in mind.
It's a one-sided fog. I think the other moment was when I got to kill somebody with a ram through.
Yes, ram through and
that also involved. I think that also involved Colossification.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, the other beautiful thing about Thwart the Enemy is that knowing that it's in your deck does change gameplay.
Absolutely.
Like I can't afford to all-out attack to try to take you down if I'm completely blown out by Thwart the Enemy, because I know, even if you cut it, which I never know from week to week.
Right.
But knowing that it's in your deck, and of course, inevitably it's going to be in your hand because that's the way life works. Mm-hmm. You can't alpha strike and lose on the crackback because there's just too big a danger is the case.
So, kids, stay in school, eat your vegetables, play your fogs.
Thwart the enemy.
Remember that. Thwart your enemies and see them driven before you. All right, final question here. Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to do this for Commander Legends. Yes. And everybody's going to open Commander Legends boxes on the first week. Right now, having not seen Commander Legends, having not seen much of Commander Legends, you have to pick your first set of packs to open in the first week. What is it?
No idea. So, here's the thing about all of us opening the same box. It's going to actually be a very different experience because, and this is the same. This is where the limited stuff comes in. Is that when you open a box in a singleton format, what really is going to end up mattering are the commons and the uncommons. And most people are going to end up playing, and it's going to be slightly better in Commander Legends because there's not a lot of danger that we're all going to be playing the same color combinations. Mm-hmm. And that's actually, I think, very important in making all opening the same box work. If you're all opening, say, Ikoria, there's a good chance that your two people are going to end up with like a Brokos deck. Yeah. And they're going to look very, very similar because there's only a limited number of commons and uncommons, and with a singleton format, you're basically playing all the good ones. So your rares are the only differentiators, and if you're off by 5 rares, that's they're basically the same deck.
Yeah.
But in Commander Legends, where each of us is effectively going to mix and match into our colors, there's a lot more chance that we're going to see more variety, but we are going to see less variety than we did from a boxing league where everybody opened different stuff.
Yeah.
So, and this comes back to what I did with my Ikoria deck is that there's no way to answer what packs I'm going to open next because there's no way to know especially as I don't know the cards, there's no way to know what decks what my deck is trying to do. And I'm very big on themes, but a lot of being big on themes, I take it to an extreme in Commander, but a lot of being big on themes in like limited stuff is that's how you get to synergies.
Right.
And so if you told me opening Ikoria that my next pack, I wouldn't have been able to tell you my next packs would be Amonkhet. But when it became clear that one of my paths to victory was cycling, Amonkhet became correct. Now, for all I know, Commander Legends will make opening Amonkhet correct again, or it will make you have to take a look at the deck you've built and say like Scott, for example, has built his blue-white flyers deck. Now, let's say I build a blue-white flyers deck. Now I have to go think, well, what sets give me really good blue-white flyers? Because I want more of those. It's possible to say, well, I'm just going to go open a value set. I go open Dominaria or something, or Fate Reforged, and it'll probably be fine and solid. And those are good default fallbacks. But I'd far rather say, here's what my deck is trying to do. What sets will actually let me do this thing? And without really knowing what's in Commander Legends.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it's going to be highly dependent on what we open and what we build, because sure, Dominaria, again, M12, the value out of M12 is kind of absurd in utility cards, in removal, in mana fixing, in ramping and thing. But otherwise, you don't want to go for the sort of mediocre choice that's just going to be sort of classic value. You want to hone what you're doing to differentiate yourself from the other decks, because again, those commons and uncommons that that are in the same colors we're going to see a lot of.
Yeah,
I mean, there's not much difference between your Brokos deck and Anthony's Brokos deck at the beginning.
He has all the busted rares that I don't, but yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But I mean, the other thing is that I think it's going to be much, much harder to build the Commander Legends decks. And the reason is because when I opened my Ikoria box, I realistically had two choices on what for my commander. It was Brokos or Nethroi.
Yep.
I had Idaris available to me if I really wanted to make a bad mono-red deck.
Right.
I have 3 copies of Idaris if I really wanted to make a bad mono-red. Yeah, my box was 2 Lutri, 3 Idaris sort of thing. It's like,
Yeah.
So, that was actually fairly easy. It was, okay, I'm playing all the black and green, and is my blue or my white better? My blue was way better than my white. I'm Brokos. I'd rather have been Nethroi. I think Nethroi is slightly stronger, but whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm clearly Brokos here. With the number of legends that they have advertised in Commander Legends, I believe you will literally be able to, for everybody who cracks their box, you will be able to build every single color combination. I think it's likely to be impossible that you can't, especially with Prismatic Piper.
Right.
Which means that literally every card you have is in play. So that's going to be a much, much more challenging, because your commander will not effectively drive your deck selection. You're going to have to do a lot more careful deck building, which will be very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very compelling experience that will take in through the end of the year, probably into a couple of weeks of the new year once we go in.
So, folks, if you're planning to open that box and you can't do it the way you're supposed to do it by drafting with your friends because we're all still locked inside, consider Boxing League.
Do it on the Go Boxing League. All right, well, we've been sitting in the chair long enough, Toby, and it's time to wrap the episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to follow, like, subscribe, ring those bells. We know you have a choice when it comes to Commander content, and we'd hate for you to miss one of our thrilling episodes. Now, before we go, Toby, tell these folks where they can find you on social media.
Well, you can find me on Twitter, but really, if you want to get hold of me nowadays, the best way is just come on the RC Discord. I'm there. I check it most days, not during work hours, but I will generally be around and will happily chat with people on there.
Sweet. All right, I'm on Twitter and Facebook by my name, Sheldon Menery. You can find me regularly in many of the channels of the self-same Discord server that Toby was mentioning. We'll always have a link in the show notes. And there's one on the front page of the Commander RC website that you can just click on and join. Please tune into my other show, Commander Community, with co-host Anthony Alongi every Monday here on Star City Games and on YouTube. On Thursdays at 8 p.m., you can find me and Toby, along with Gavin and Scott, on the Commander RC Twitch TV channel. And you never know what kind of special guests are going to show up for Game 2. That's twitch.tv/Commander RC. On Sundays, you can also find us there, although Toby has to duck out for the second game, so it's even more likely that you'll find somebody interesting playing in Game 2. And of course, always on Sundays, you can find me right here on StarCityGames.com writing about the best format in Magic history. We'll see you next time on the Command Share, and as always, I'm Sheldon Menery.